Hey guys, welcome back to Token Tech. Today I want to talk about Intel's newly released CPUs. I know, relatively old news by now. At least the reviews went up last week. I just wanted to take my time really kind of ingesting everything, going through it mentally, and figuring out what I wanted to say and where I really stood on these new CPUs. Now, basically the conclusion of this video is, even though Intel's made a lot of strides and is reacting to AMD's competition in this market, they still have a lot of room to grow, and I still can't honestly recommend Intel CPUs even right now, even with their improved gaming performance, just because of the price disparity. Now, before I get too deep into that, I want to just talk about real quick some of the things that I like that Intel did this generation. The first thing I like that they did this generation comes in the form of temperature management. Right, their older CPUs ran very hot. The 7700K is probably the hottest chip that most people in recent memory have used. It was so bad that people were voiding their warranties to delid their CPUs and put liquid metal on, which could destroy the CPU or their system if they didn't do it properly, just to get better temperatures. And they were significantly better, 20 plus degrees Celsius better, just by switching out the thermal interface. The next thing Intel did was they went to an STIM, which is kind of like liquid metal, kind of like solder, and it helped with temperatures, right? But we still were seeing higher temperatures than we'd like, especially with the 8700K and especially with the 9900K. AMD, on the other hand, since first generation Ryzen was doing solder, which is very similar to liquid metal and gives you very good temperatures. Now, liquid metal, you can see slightly better, like 1 to 3 degrees Celsius better temperatures, but the solder is good enough and honestly doesn't warrant any type of modification. Even with the STIM on Intel, though, their chips still ran quite hot, especially if you're overclocking to the maximum. So if you're running a 9900K at 5.1, 5.2 gigahertz, that thing was hot, okay? And so people were thinking that was going to be the case with these new chips, especially with their new 10-core chip at 5.3, right, gigahertz. That thing's got to be super hot. But to many surprise, it wasn't very, very hot. Even though it's pulling a ton of power, even when you overclock it and it pulls a ton of power, its temperature for the most part isn't too bad. Definitely can be managed. Let's put it that way. And that's because they did something that a lot of overclockers do, and I mean like professional overclockers, is that they grinded down the CPU die. So for those of you who don't know, the CPU die, the transistors are on the bottom of it. At the top, there's some portion of that that's useless, right? That's just there and it just takes up space and it makes it harder to cool the CPU, because the closer you can get to the heat source, the easier and more efficiently you can get the heat out of that heat source. It doesn't get trapped in there. So they grinded away part of that useless space, putting the IHS closer to the actual heat source, to the transistors. And so the IHS and your cooler does a better job of getting rid of that heat. So that's actually a really cool improvement and workaround to this obstacle of temperatures on such an old, mature process node. Right? They're still on 14 nanometer, and AMD is up to 7 nanometer. Okay, so Intel really does need to do that as well. But doing this to grind down the CPU to get better temperatures is cool, and I would love to see AMD do the same thing, because many of you know, I've done videos on this channel about it, temperatures with their new 3000 series chips are kind of all over the place. They don't ever really get so bad that they really shut down your system or cause any problems, but they're worse than we would like to admit, right? Hence why I have videos on how to lower temperatures by undervolting or by getting better fans and coolers in your system. Anyways, if they did that, that'd be really cool, and we would see that competition going back and forth, not just one-sided. The other thing that Intel did was give hyper-threading to everything. Again, this is a response to AMD. AMD, when they launched Zen, gave hyper-threading to everything. Intel didn't. Their i5s didn't have it. Their i3s didn't have it. It made those chips really hard to recommend, basically impossible to recommend, because they just couldn't keep up with the Ryzen counterparts. Now everything has hyper-threading, which makes them a bit more comparable to their Ryzen counterparts, because they actually have the extra threads and can, for the most part, keep up in different types of workloads outside of gaming. They don't beat AMD in those workloads, but they do keep up a lot better than they used to, especially the i5 series. So hyper-threading was another great thing. Um, and the other thing, and this comes again with being on a mature, old process node, is overclocking. Being so efficient and so mature, you can easily overclock these CPUs. And honestly, if you have them, if you're buying the new 10th generation, you better overclock them, right? You better be buying the case Q and you better be overclocking it, because that's really where these chips shine. You really see that difference in gaming performance when you overclock. If you don't overclock these chips, you might as well just save the money and go AMD. If you really care about gaming and you're gaming with a 2080 Ti at 1080p at like 300 hertz, then I get it. Yeah, go for it. Get it, overclock it, be happy. That's one of their best features, but it's also one of their worst features because it's not on every chip. You still have to buy a K series chip just to overclock. Again, going back to AMD, from Zen 1 on first generation Ryzen, you could overclock every chip, X or non-X variant. Intel is still stuck in their ways, only allowing you to overclock the K variant of the chips, which cost more, and locking it to one series of motherboard, the Z series. AMD has two, a cheaper option, the B series, and the more expensive option, the X series. Intel only allows you to overclock on the expensive Z series and not on their cheaper B series, which means that if you want to overclock, not only are you buying a more expensive CPU, but you are buying a more expensive motherboard. Okay, all that adds to the cost, which is their biggest downfall. So now we're clearly into the downfall, or their worst features, is price. The price disparity between Intel and AMD is still very clear and evident. If you look at the 3600 right now, you can get on Amazon for $167. Its closest Intel competitor, the i5 10600K, is going for like $260 to $280. So it's $100 difference, and the 3600 comes with an adequate cooler. Not a good one. I wouldn't recommend it for long term, but if you just want something to get started with, definitely will do the job. The 10600K doesn't even come with a cooler. If you want to overclock, you have to put it on an expensive motherboard, and you have to get a decent cooler. Yes, temperatures aren't terrible, but you still want to have a decent cooler. So the AMD chip, you can get a B450. Comes with a stock cooler. It's $100 cheaper already, and the price savings just keep snowballing from there. So it's hard to recommend anything outside of the 3600, even for gamers. And then when you go up, you get to the realm of the 3900X, a 12-core chip, now priced at about $400, which makes the 10700K look stupid, and it makes the 10900K look stupid. And the 10600K already made those chips look stupid in terms of gaming, because you can basically match them in gaming performance just by overclocking your 10600K. So what is the point? And that's where I kind of just, where I think they just fall apart. You know what I mean? That if the 10900K was at $400, yeah, that'd be really compelling. If the 10700K was at $300, that'd be compelling. If the 10600K was at $200, that would be compelling. All these things would be so different if they were just priced about $100 cheaper than they are. At that point, I would highly recommend them. I'm like, hey, look, they're pretty good. They have good temperatures. They're really good at overclocking. Gaming is very good, and they're close enough to AMD in productivity that you can justify going with them. But being that they are priced so much more than AMD chips, it just doesn't really make sense when you can save so much money and get all other workloads you're winning, and then get a little bit worse in gaming performance, and it's only if you're gaming at 1080p with a 2080 Ti with a high refresh rate monitor. It's like, well, then what's the point? Literally, what is the point of having that chip? Some people might say upgradability, right? You get that 10600K, overclock it to 5.1 to 5.3 gigahertz, you have an all-in-one liquid cooler on it, and then you buy yourself a decent GPU. Not a 2080 Ti, but something decent, right? Not something where you would notice the difference between the two chips yet, but something decent. And then in 3 years to 5 years from now, you swap GPUs, you upgrade the graphics card, and now you're getting something that performs like a 2080 Ti that, today, but 5 years from now. And you can take full advantage of it because your CPU can take full advantage of something that performs like a 2080 Ti. But the thing is that even going to be true, right? You don't know. You can't predict the future, and you never want to buy on a promise, okay? You want to buy on what is real right now. So if you're hoping that in 5 years time, 3 years time, you're going to be upgrading to a graphics card that's equivalent to a 2080 Ti, and so you're going to go with a more expensive CPU right now, it just, to me, it just doesn't make sense. I'd rather buy a 3600 today, save that $100 to buy a better graphics card today and enjoy a higher or better gaming experience today. Because unless I'm buying a 2080 Ti, I'm never going to really notice the difference between the two CPUs. So basically what I'm getting at here is this is a good step, a step in the right direction for Intel, and it shows that they are actually responding to AMD. Not completely, but in some ways. I wish they would respond in more ways, as I already talked about in this video, but let's see what they do with their next generation. Maybe when they finally move to the next process node. Aside from that, if they did fix prices, if they dropped the price of all these CPUs by, again, like around $100, hands down, I could recommend them. But at their current pricing and with AMD dropping their prices, it's just, I'm sorry, Intel, you still gotta catch up to AMD. Zen 2 is still better in my opinion because of the price and the performance it offers. And Zen 3 hopefully will come out sometime later this year or early next year. And so you definitely have some catching up to do. That's where I stand on this. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.